I welcome you all for this today's session. Let us discuss about prohibitions and sanctions today. The caste system of Hindu society is based on certain principles as explained in the previous chapters. The principles of Sanatana Dharma are further supported by the notion of purity and pollution. This idea of purity and pollution was carried to further strengthen the caste system and its four varnas as watertight compartments. As per the principle that there cannot be a mixture of pure and impure things. Pure things are said to be good omens which bring prosperity to the concerned follower, while the impure things are closely connected with bad omens which turn to be a curse to the violators of the rules of dharma and purity and pollution. Throughout India, the concept of purity and pollution are practiced by the individuals of the upper and lower caste axiomatically. The upper caste maintain social distancing from the lower caste by maintaining distance even while communicating or dealing with them. The very concept of social distancing determined the concepts of purity and pollution in ancient India. On the other hand, in modern India, the upper caste individuals, that is the economically well placed in urban areas, are accustomed to hire domestic helps from lower castes for various types of household responsibility. They communicate with each other even though they maintain a distance. The social distancing is maintained by the upper caste from lower caste as they were believed to be in the state of pollution due to their caste and status. This social distancing determines the concept of purity and pollution practiced in modern India. Therefore, the concept of purity and pollution are inexplicably important feature of caste system. Purity and pollution are very important aspects of Hindu Dharma which determines the prohibitions and sanctions practiced in ancient India, which continues to strengthen the caste system. According to Manu Smriti, the body is cleansed by water while the internal organs are purified by truthfulness, the individual soul by austerities and learning, and also finally the intellect by true knowledge. Purity is an important aspect of Hindu ritual and spiritual practices. Cleanliness has great significance in Hinduism. As per the daily ritual, the heaven, Swaha, is a pure realm. The earth, Bhuva, is our mixed worlds, and the underworld, Patala, is an impure place. Only those who are pure like the heavenly beings can reach the heaven, Swaha. Hence, the Hindu scriptures emphasize the importance of cleanliness and purity in the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of humans upon earth and prescribe self-purification towards attainment of salvation. Light, wisdom, discernment, righteousness, divinity, prosperity, happiness, pure karma, auspiciousness, cleanliness, health, strength, mental brilliance, intelligence, vigor, name, fame, success, austerity, immortality, and morality are considered as prime characteristic traits and aspects of purity. Impurity is characterized by darkness, delusion, ignorance, egoism, evil conduct, evil desires, selfishness, sickness, death, disease, adversity, suffering, sorrow, conflict, poverty, sin, weakness, lust, pride, envy, anger, cruelty, violence, grossness, sensuality, duality, attachments, bondage, vanity, etc. They manifest in beings due to the predominance of rajas and tamas qualities, which are the other two modes of nature that are synonymous with impurity. Predominance of purity leads to freedom, a higher birth in the next life, enlightenment or liberation, whereas the prevalence of impurities lead to lower birth, mental darkness, leading to suffering. Hence, Hindu spiritual and ritual practices are essentially purificatory practices with an aim to attain moksha. They emphasize the importance of cultivating purity, be it prayer, worship, meditation, righteous conduct, yoga, or austerity. Their aim is to purify the person, his environment, the world, family, ancestors, or life itself, so that he or she can become free from sinful karma, transgressions, bondage, and suffering. As explicit and evident, the Indian caste system is based on the principles, which is a complex social structure wherein the social roles like one's occupation or profession became hereditary, resulting in restricted social mobility and fixed status hierarchies. Caste not only dictates one's occupation, but the dietary habits and interaction with members of other castes as well. The caste system primarily starts with food. The purity of food depends upon its source from whom it is accepted. The food obtained by way of begging for alms was not considered as impure food. But here too, the taboo on food exists with regard to a Brahmana. It is the source from where the Brahmana accepts his food that mattered. The purity of food included the ceremonial purity as well. The interdiction on Brahmana strictly restricting him from accepting food from the thief, a prostitute, a cruel man, a liar, a criminal, an angry man, nishada, musician, physician, hunter, goldsmith, state players, dealers of weapon, basket weavers, washermen, dyers, carpenters and moneylenders et al. Of lower caste is noteworthy. The principle behind such prohibition was that the people mentioned above were considered immoral and unclean people, therefore food received from them was also impure and polluted. The meaning of impure food was extended further so as to include the kind of food as given out in succeeding lines. The food that had turned sour, stale food, leftovers of another person, the food in which hair or insect found, food picked at by birds and food on which a person has sneezed. The food that were considered as polluted also include food touched intentionally by anybody, for example, a menstruating woman, dogs or any other animal. Manu prescribed rules on what should be consumed and what should not be consumed. Meat has to be abandoned altogether by Brahmanas. The twice born caste were advised to abstain from using pork, chicken and vegetables like onion, garlic and mushrooms. The code of conduct for twice born is stricter than for Shudras. Manu prescribed even penances for those who violated the rules of eating. Paradoxically, it was considered that the part of the body above the navel was pure and that the part below was impure. Some animals were graded as pure and others as impure. The impure animals were forbidden from eating. Even the touch or look at these animals would make things impure. Death or birth in a family made the family impure. Ironically, what was considered as the most impure was the menstruating woman. Her touch, her look, as also her voice that polluted the things in the house. There are certain articles which are said to be pure and certain others which are merely purifying agents. The pure articles could easily be polluted by their association with the impure articles. The purifying articles could purify the impure articles, while at the same time being capable of purifying themselves in the case of their self-pollution. Incredibly, there are certain articles which could never be polluted by anything. It is sacrosanct that all actions identified to be pure or not done on impure days and occasions. The study of Veda had been prohibited on birth or death in a family or house and in the presence of any Shudra or menstruating woman. The death is considered impure. The dead body of a Brahmin would further be impure if it were to be carried by Shudra. Manu prescribes various purifying agencies that would purify the impure or polluted things. As mentioned earlier, the purifying agencies are control of mind, austerities, the sun, liberality, sacred texts, etc. There are methods of purifying various inanimate things like vessels made of gold, silver and copper. Calcutt says the purity or pollution of a Brahmana was much more than what we may call physical purity and impurity. We may distinguish contamination or pollution from physical impurity. If a Shudra touches the food of a Brahman, the Brahmana feels that by some occult process the whole food is eaten or would make his body impure, at least unjust, as much as food fixed with dirt or with articles that ought not to be eaten would do. There were certain sacraments or the religious rites that were considered as most important. There were altogether 16 sacraments that would start from the conception in the womb and would continue until and after death. It is believed that these religious rites would purify persons from their sins during and after life on earth. The exact reason for distinguishing higher caste from lower caste was on the grounds of purity rather than racial grounds. The Brahmin is considered to be at the top of the ladder of caste system due to his purity. The Shudras are at the bottom as they are considered to be impure. The entire caste system is based on purity and pollution. The caste system is so rigid because the rules with regard to purity and pollution are rigid. It is believed that any violation of the said rules would invariably land a person in hell and that the violation would destroy all things. It is envisaged that the prohibition on food was the direct result of the taboo on marriage. It was common for an upper caste man to have a concubine from the lower caste. Such persons were outcasted on the ground that he might have taken food or drink from the hands of his concubine. The restrictions on food in a way was aimed indirectly in discouraging hypergamy and concubinage. To evaluate as to which caste was the clean caste, it was an accepted norm that if a Brahmin could take water from the hands of a particular caste, such caste was adjudged as a clean caste. This custom was differed from one area to another. Generally in southern and western India, the stringent aforesaid measures had been adopted wherein the higher caste people could only take water either from their own caste or from that of a caste higher than that of their own. But in northern India, there were no such restrictions and the higher caste people could comfortably accept water from even a lower caste. By all accounts, since Ganges water has been considered to be pure, it is irrefragable that any person of any caste could accept the said water from even lower caste people with the subtle proviso that restricted taking water from the vessel of lower caste people. The rules regarding consumption of food were more severe than drinking water. The entry of strangers and low caste into the kitchen was not permitted. A mere glance of the low caste people inside the kitchen was considered to pollute the food prepared therein. It is important to note that there are kacha and pakka food. The restrictions associated with kacha food were stringent. The combination of grain and water was supposed to give sacred character to the food. Perhaps this was on account of the belief in the identity of soul and its association of life with water that the cereal plants have. It was believed that the ghee contents in pakka food would invariably sanctify the food. There were also restrictions in usage of the vessels as also a total ban on the lower caste from using the well water which exclusively belonged to the upper caste people. In addition, there were taboos on using other facilities such as schools, restaurants, cremation ground, hairdressing places, dhobi or by lower caste people. And not to mention the least, even on passing the smoking pipe from one person to another, which was based on caste. There were also certain customs that needed to be followed to avoid pollution. There is avoidance of sexual contact with wife during her menstruation and during the medically restricted period after the childbirth. The menstruating women were expected to keep 7 feet away from anyone, and ironically even to ensure that her shadow would not fall on anyone. Further, people were advised to refrain from contacting a person who had just lit a funeral pyre or persons who were in the state of ceremonial impurity or forbidden, that is for a specified period. People who visited the premises of the houses of the deceased were strictly required to bathe before entering their own house. This was with a view to ward off the infections that one may have occurred, as also to get rid of the negativity that may have occurred. It is interesting to note that there were also pollution known as distance pollution. This was strictly practiced in southern India, especially in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, etc. Proscription on wearing cloths too. Different types of garments and ornaments were prescribed to each varna, and the wearing pattern were also specified. Regarding wearing of sacred thread, different materials were prescribed for different castes, that is, the cotton thread for Brahmins, hem for Kshatriya and wool for Vaishya. Shudras were not considered twice born, hence they were not entitled to sacred thread. There were restrictions on using language. Certain values were prescribed to low caste people on how to address others. In addition, there were taboos on travelling too. The Hindus, especially the Brahmins, were forbidden from crossing the sea. It is reiterated that there were restrictions on occupation too. which has been covered in an elaborate manner in the previous chapters. Now, let us see the sanctions. The Indian caste system acts both as a political stabilizer and a social stabilizer. It has virtually served as the constitution of Hindu society. As a political stabilizer, it has assured an orderly government against despotism, exercise of absolute power in a cruel or oppressive way. The ultimate controlling authority of the Indian society in India were the kings, who were very secular in their rule and governance. Vasishtha, quoted by A.M.T. Jackson in the note of the history of the caste system, says, "Let the king, paying attention to all the laws of countries, castes and families, make the four varna fulfill their particular duties. Let him punish who stray." J.H. Hutton says, "If the secular ruler was the ultimate authority during the early period of Indian history, he certainly continued to be so in the Middle Ages." Balal Sen, king of Bengal in the 20th century, prescribed the order of precedence of different castes of Brahmanas in his dominations, and raised the status of some castes and degraded others. There are so many such cases in different parts of India. The ruling king was the final authority who decided the punishment on the basis of the advice of the Brahmins. In Nepal, the castes are still under the control of the hereditary king. In Malabar, the Kshatriya Maharaja of Cochin was the final authority in caste matters, even for a Nambudri Brahmin. In Indore, a council of Shastris was appointed by the king to advise him on these affairs of caste. Generally, in whole of India, the kings of different parts of the country decided the affair of the caste of their particular region. Those who disobeyed the decision of the ruler were outcasts. For instance, in Orissa, even some of the high caste people were outcast by the king, as they refused to accept the decision of the ruler in a caste. Om Malay, in his caste custom, says, "No priest, barber or washerman could render them any service, with the result they had long beard matted with dirt, their hair hung in long strands and was filthy to the extreme, and their clothes were beyond description for uncleanliness." The affairs of the caste were decided by the secular rule or of political authority. J.H. Hutton says, "So clearly has the principle that the secular power is the final arbiter of caste and has been accepted in the past, that the Mughal rulers of Bengal and British successors have in turn found themselves in the position of judges in such matters. In Bengal, the Mughal governors retained the right to sanction readmission to caste. In 1769, instructions were given to British officers who were in charge of the revenue administration, that when any man had naturally forfeited his caste, it was to be observed that he cannot be restored to it without the sanction of government, which was a political supremacy reserved to themselves by the Mohammedans. There were some exceptions to the general rule that relegated powers to the ruler on caste affairs. There were councils of Shastris in Indore and Gwalior which advised on caste affairs. The Dharma Sabha of Kashmir even passed judgments. In Mysore and Kannada, the Brahmins and Lingayats disposed of the questions of caste. In Assam Valley, the Gosains, who were the heads of Shastras, were referred to when caste councils found it difficult to dealing with the caste. In some of the northern Indian castes, regular officials known as Dharmadhikari decided the affairs of the caste. There were a caste council known as Panchayat. Though the literal meaning of Panchayat was 5, the council consisted more than 5 members. The Panchayat had only small jurisdiction so as to enable the members of the council to assemble who had the knowledge of the local customs and rules. J.H. Hutton says, in practice, the members of the caste in such an area will usually form a nearly a related group and spoken of collectivity. In northern India, as a birdari or as Bhai band formed an association of kinsmen. They may indeed actually constitute an exogamous unit within the embracing endogamous caste, but not the less act for the caste as a whole in enforcing sanctions on the caste members within the sphere of action. In any case, they will not consist of a group so large as to embrace more than one endogamous unit, since an endogamous subcaste will normally have rules varying from those of other such subcastes, and each must administer their own rule. Local conditions such as case of communication, numbers of the castes residing, and their concentration or disposal must determine the area within which the caste council functions. In conditions of this kind, there are obviously room for every kind of variety in the nature, constitution and working of the caste council, and since the variation will be no less than the already encountered in the structure of caste and the restrictions enforced by it, is both impossible to give here a complete account of all of them and unnecessarily to do so for the purpose of understanding caste. The panchayat might be a permanent institution or an intermittent. Some members of a panchayat were hereditary and some were elected. At certain times, the members were appointed ad hoc to deal with particular cases. The members had the administrative and judicial powers. Every panchayat had a headman known as sarpanch and the members known as panch. Headmen were sometimes hereditary, and this rule applied to the vice chairman, members, executive officers as well. Blunt has painstakingly given the details of the panchayat system for 29 castes, which is worth reading. The panchayat had the control over the members of the caste. It decided on any matter that degraded the status of the caste by the members. All the violations of the rules of the caste were referred to the panchayat. The panchayat dealt with the following issues of the caste: violation of taboos on food and drink, violation of marriage rules, violation of trade conventions, fortification, petty assault, adultery with the married, killing a cow or other forbidden animals, defying the feast customs during ceremonies, refusing to send a wife to her husband, keeping a concubine a woman of another caste, encroaching in another's clientele, and raising or lowering prices. The evidence before a caste panchayat was frequently given either by Ganges water or by sacred tulsi or by holding a cow's tail. The Blunt in his caste system says, a white stone tied round with black woolen thread used by the Bhutias of Kumaon. No man dare tell a lie with his right hand on his stone. The culprits were sometimes subject to severe torture so as to extract the truth from them. The accused persons were asked to dip an arm into the boiling cow dung and extract a coin or a pebble. The culprits were to hold a piece of red hot iron. If the culprit came out unhurt, he was declared as innocent. The accused of a Brahmin subcaste of Sambalpur had to take oath that if he were to be found guilty, he would become blind or his children would hate within a specified time. The oath was recorded on a palm leaf and that was kept in the temple for a period. Till then, the person was outcast. After the specified period, if none of the above had happened to be culprit, he was to be declared an innocent. The panchayat was empowered to pass or award the following punishment on the culprit: prohibition of water, prohibition of kacha food, prohibition of any kind of service by fellow castemen, outcasting the culprit either temporarily or permanently, corporal punishment or religious expiation, fees to be given to the caste men, fines, collection of the fine by begging, prohibition of pilgrimage. The fines collected were generally spent on the common feast or used for charitable purposes. The prerequisites of the panchayat were brought out of them. Sometimes the culprits were subject to humiliation. The culprit who killed the cow had to make a pilgrimage with the cow's tail tied to his staff for a certain period in the same way, or he has to accompany a cow holding the tail for a specified period. Partial head shaving of the culprit was also of one of the punishments. The culprit sometimes was paraded on a donkey with white and black painting on his face. Sometimes the culprit was asked to wear the garland of chapels. The unchaste woman had to carry a basket of mud on head and walk around the village. The punishment included bathing in Ganges by the culprit, or swallowing of its sand, or drinking the matter into which the Brahmin had dipped the toe. The culprits who had committed petty offences were purified and inducted into the caste. Such were the sanctions passed on the violators of the caste rulers, which were purely intended to maintain dharma in the caste. The caste councils of the lower caste, both in southern India and in northern India, are well organized. The high castes rarely have any organizations other than sabhas, but the rules of the caste are maintained by public opinion and by the feeling of the elderly or senior members of the caste. The prohibitions and sanctions were intended to regulate caste members and keep them within the fold. These were the means to maintain dharma and establish a religious and righteous society. Thank you.